Our guest today is USA Today bestselling author Lynda Cohen Loigman, and she's here to talk about love and her latest novel called The Matchmaker's Gift. Hi, how are you,
Hi,
Lynda?
thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
You bet. Okay, Lynda, The Matchmaker's Gift is your third novel,
Mhm.
and it's told from two different perspectives. So tell us a little bit about Sarah and Abby, and what are their common what common gift do they share?
Sure. Yes. So as you said, The Matchmaker's Gift is a dual timeline story, and we follow Sarah, who is an immigrant. She comes to New York City in 1910, and she's 10 years old, and we sort of follow her life on the Lower East Side as a young woman. And she has a gift for seeing other people's soulmates. She can spot them. Something just sort of reveals itself to her. And her line that she says a lot, especially as she gets older, is "I see what I see and I know what I know."
I like that.
So, yeah. And Abby is her granddaughter, and her timeline takes place mainly in 1994. She's inherited this gift of her grandmother's, though she doesn't really know it at first. And it's very problematic for her because she is not only cynical about love and marriage, but she also happens to be a divorce attorney. So her whole job, her whole purpose is helping people to split up. And she finds that she is seeing that some people should maybe stay together, or other people who she's working on their prenuptial agreements for, who are going to be together, should not be together. So this inheritance, this gift, really gets in the way of her career.
Well, Sarah and her grandmother are Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into the novel? Because I think Jewish people are big matchmakers, right?
Well, it's interesting because so when you think about if I say the word matchmaker to you or to anybody really, a lot of people think of that scene from Fiddler on the Roof. You know, they think of the character Yenta, the matchmaker. But I'm a writer of historical fiction. I'm not a romance writer, you know. So when I decided I was going to write a matchmaker book, I came at it from a historical perspective and from a perspective of what was the history of Jewish matchmaking like on the Lower East Side in those early years, in the 1910s, the 1920s, the turn of the century. And what I found out was, first of all, the idea of Yenta, the matchmaker, wasn't really what it looked like back then. Even the New York Times wrote about Jewish matchmakers, and they said in one of the articles that I read, there were over 5,000 matchmakers in New York in 1910. And
5,000?
over 5,000, yeah. They said that was a conservative estimate. And the bulk of them were men. And so when I read about that and I started to understand that, and there were cartoons about those matchmakers in the Yiddish daily newspapers, and they were always portrayed as men because it was a business. You know, these people were really earning their living this way, and people didn't necessarily want to deal with women in business that way. And when I learned that, suddenly the conflict, the bigger picture conflict of the novel revealed itself to me, because I understood that it would be a very interesting story to have a young female unmarried matchmaker competing in a world against all of these men. And that's where the beginnings of the story came from.
I see. And well, what gave the idea in the first place?
So this book was written, I wrote this book during the COVID lockdown, during the first year of COVID. And what happened then was that my daughter, who was a junior in college, called me on a Tuesday crying and said they told us we have to leave by Sunday. We all have to go home. And she was coming home, and her roommate, you know, they lost their whole college experience. And
Yes.
so, you know, she asked if her roommate could come and stay with us also, which was really wonderful just for them, because then at least they had a friend. You know, it made it a little bit more like college. But also it was wonderful for us, for our family. So before they came home, I was living in my house with my husband and my son, my teenage son, who was a senior in high school when the lockdown started, and my dog, who you met a few minutes ago, who's also a man. So I was living in a house of men. And then these two young, very bright, energetic, well, see, your dog knows.
Right.
We're talking about them.
Diana, I'm sorry. She's kind of too big to put up.
No, it's fine. So these young, very bright, very ambitious women came to stay with us, and we had dinner together every night. And because we had a guest in the house, we were a little bit more formal than we otherwise might have been. So we really sat together every single night for dinner. And the conversation around the table was elevated because there were college young women sitting there. And we talked a lot about just the different issues that they faced as young women in school, their concerns about the workplace. I told them some stories about my workplace, and that was sort of swirling in my head, which had nothing to do with the book, but that was just to give you an idea of where I was at mentally. I was thinking about these young women and how things maybe hadn't changed as much as I wished that they had changed for them, for when they were going to start entering the workforce. So I was thinking about that. And then at the same time as we were doing what everybody did during lockdown, cooking and eating, we were also binging television shows. So we started binging Indian matchmaking, which was really fascinating. And when we finished watching all the episodes, my daughter's roommate turned to me and said, my grandmother was an Orthodox Jewish matchmaker in Brooklyn. And she pulled up this article on her phone. There was a New York Times article written about her in 1977. And it just got got all the wheels turning. So I had been working on another book at that time. I was in the middle. I was like halfway done with another book that I had a contract for and I was going to give to my editor. But I happened to tell my agent about this matchmaking idea. And she said, I really want to tell them about this. But I didn't have a book. It was like a twinkle in my eye, as they say. There was nothing on paper at all. And she talked to my editor, and they were both just really excited about it. I was excited about it too, but I wouldn't have written it right then if they hadn't said, get started right away. We want you to get started. And then the issue became, okay, what time period am I coming at this from? Is this I knew it would be a granddaughter story, but would the grandmother be in the 1950s? Everybody loves the 1950s. Is that the time period that I want to do? But then when I started researching and I found, references to these, especially one wedding that played a big part in inspiring the book on the Lower East Side, I realized that I wanted to go earlier and that it would be the turn of the century. It would be the 1910s and the 1920s, because that was the richest time period for this kind of story for me.
Yes. Well, Abby shows a lot of insight into people, and I wonder, do you believe that writers have some sort of special insight into people in more depth than...
That's an interesting question. I believe that writers are curious about people and want to understand what makes people tick and want to be able to describe it. I think that if you are a person who kind of stands in the grocery store listening to other people talk and gets excited about it and is always thinking what if, then I believe that you're a writer. I believe if you have that curiosity, that's why.
There's a lot of philosophy in this book. Like Sarah says, it's never too late to die or get married. And where did you learn that phrase? And some other
that one is that people have asked me about a lot of the phrases. There are so many phrases which are really Yiddish phrases that I put into the story. That one, it's never too late to die or get married. I can't even remember where I found that. Just reading and looking for things come up. One of my favorites is when a thief kisses you, count your teeth. I love that one because I just think it's a great image. But there are a lot of fun. Yiddish is a very interesting language, and I don't speak it. I mean, I don't speak it, but the sayings that come out of it, and are just really so whimsical and fun. And
Yes.
My grandmother used to speak it. My mother and my grandmother used to speak Yiddish to each other when they didn't want me to know what they were saying. So I have the rhythm of it in my head, but I don't know it.
The words.
Yeah.
Is finding true love a calling or a curse?
Well, I think in their case, it's really more of a calling than a curse. It is problematic, and that's something that as I was writing this story and I kept kind of digging deeper, that's the question that I wanted them to grapple with. Because, of course, if you can see who everyone really should be with in the end, what's to prevent your own misery, right? Because you might really want to be with someone, but see that they're meant for someone else. And that's a heartache in the worst way. So it can be a curse, but it ultimately for both of these women, it really is their calling.
What about you? You hold both English literature and legal degrees. Do you prefer one profession over another?
Oh, absolutely. I never should have been a lawyer. When I graduated from college, it was 1990. And at that time, I think every English major I know was going to law school. It was just the thing that we all seemed to do. I'm not really sure why I didn't question it more. I think I was a very unsophisticated college student. So whereas like my daughter and her roommate who came home and spent time with us are so sophisticated to me and so aware of the opportunities that are out there for them in the world, I was completely unaware. I think I was just, I don't know, I just really didn't understand that maybe I could have tried to get a job, a entry-level job in publishing and something else. So I went to law school because that seemed to be the thing to do. And I used to hate my classes. I used to take up my Norton Anthology of Poetry when I should have been studying for constitutional law. It was rough there for a while. But it was interesting because when I had my first job as a lawyer, my first summer job, they call them summer associates. So you get a summer associate job. And my first summer associate job was at a firm called Milbank Tweed, which was a big law firm downtown in New York. And they had a trust and estates department. And I rotated through 3 departments, but trust and estates was my first. And the man who gave me my very, very first legal assignment in my whole career was right out of Central Casting. He was like over 6 feet tall with the suspenders and the bow tie. And he was a real gentleman. And he was a trust and estates lawyer, a family advisor. And he sat me down and he told me a story. And the story was about a client of the firm, a very wealthy, like Greek shipping magnate, whose wife was in a psychiatric institution in Switzerland or something like that. And he had illegitimate children in different countries. And the legal question that I was asked to research was the intestacy laws of these various countries. That was my assignment. But I didn't really care about my assignment. What I cared about was the story. That was a story, and he told it well. And that should have been my first clue to just walk out the door and say, I'm going to write stories. I don't care about the legal part. But I did it for 10 years or so. And I managed to focus on the legal things when I had to. But
tell us about your publishing journey. Was it difficult to get that first book deal? How did you find your agent? So my first book is called The Two-Family House. And that was really inspired by my mother's, not by any circumstances, but just by her childhood home, because she grew up in a 2-family house in Brooklyn. And I came up with the idea for the story when my daughter was 6 months old. I didn't start writing the story until 15 years later. And in that time, I thought about it a lot. I used to kind of tell it to my friends, this story. It was like I would take a walk, you go on a walk with your friends around the neighborhood. Right. You walk your dogs, and I would tell my friends this story bit by bit by bit. And at some point, I was probably thinking about it too much. But my mom got sick. My mom passed away. She was very young. She was only 63. And it was right before I turned 40. And at that point, I had been thinking about that story and just sitting on it
doing nothing about it for all those years. And there was something about that time period, you know, in my life, those two terrible, one natural milestone, my mother dying and then me turning 40, that really compelled me to start writing. And so I took a class, I enrolled in a class at Sarah Lawrence. And I took a class, which was more like a workshop, for over 5 years. And I wrote that first book over a 5-year period. And when I was done with it, I was very lucky. Sarah Lawrence had a publishing conference and I met my agent there. And she told me she hadn't read that story before. You know, it was something different. And she liked that. And so she wanted me to send her the whole manuscript, and I did. And, you know, that was in August. And in November, she sold the book. So it was a very exciting, very lucky thing that happened.
Absolutely. And this is your third book, I think.
My third, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And you've also won quite a few awards, I think.
Well, I was nominated for Goodreads Choice Award. So to be nominated, you know what they say at the Oscars, just to be nominated is an honor. It's very true in the Goodreads Choice Awards, yeah. That's and that book hit the USA Today bestseller list, which was really exciting.
What are you working on now?
So right now I'm working on another historical story with kind of a dash of magic. The Matchmaker's Gift was the first story that I did that with, kind of this dash of magical realism. And I find that I really enjoy that, and that it lightens my, I don't know, it just lightens my mood. It lightens my day. It just brings me a lot of joy when I'm writing it. So my next book has a dash of it also. It's inspired by my husband's great-grandmother, who was a pharmacist. She graduated from pharmacy school in 1921. And so this is a story, not about her, but inspired by her, about a young woman who is the daughter of a pharmacist and just sort of is caught between her father's commitment to just straight, absolute scientific medicine and this other relative sort of old world remedies. And there's a little bit of a love potion thing going on. And it's fun. A pharmacy is a very fun setting because, you know, people come in and they tell the pharmacist everything, especially back then. The pharmacist was like a bartender, right? Your confidant, your psychiatrist, your doctor, everything. You tell them your secrets. You ask them for advice in medicinal form. And so it's a very interesting setting. It's fun to play with.
Since you mentioned your husband, I have to ask you this question. Is he a good match?
Yeah, actually, we were set up on a blind date. So not by a matchmaker, but by my friend, by my law school roommate, who was his office mate when they were summer associates at a firm in the city. So we met. We were in law school, but we were at different law schools. And she worked with him, and I lived with her, and she set us up. So
that's great. Yeah. Well, you dedicate this book to Ellie and Adele. Who are they?
Ellie is my daughter, and Adele is her roommate. So those are the two, those were my two inspirations, really, truly, for this story.
Yeah.
Yeah, my son was a little mad because usually I dedicate the book to everybody in the family. He's like, what? Where am I? The next one can be for you, but this one was really for them.
The next one, yeah. What advice do you have for writers who are trying to break into this tough publishing field?
I think you have to just really keep writing. When I was taking my class at Sarah Lawrence, the professor said something at some point that was like the difference between people who are published and people who are not, is that the people who are published just never stop writing. You can't stop. There's so much discouragement. There's so much rejection. Even after you have a book, there's rejection. I mean, before The Matchmaker's Gift, I wrote a whole book that people didn't really want, that I didn't sell. So it's not something that is a linear path. It's a very topsy-turvy, all over the place, twisted path. And if you keep writing, you can't get discouraged. You have to just keep going and keep telling the stories that you want.
That's very good advice. Well, Lynda Cohen Loigman, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat with you.
Okay. That's Lynda Cohen Loigman. Am I saying that right?
Loigman? Yep. Yeah, Loigman.
Author of The Matchmaker's Gift, and it's just out from St. Martin's Press. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.